Hey guys, welcome back to the channel and part 4 of my custom Spirit dropship build. What you see in front of you right now is the almost complete troop bay as shown at the end of part 3. I said I might have to take a small break while I gather parts to build the other troop bay, and you'll be pleased to know I've managed to do so. And here it is here. As you can see, the fronts are slightly different. I still haven't finalised the nose plates for each troop bay. It's probably one of the last things I'm going to do. But for this video, I wanted to focus on getting these two troop bays connected together. I didn't really allow for this when I was creating the troop bays. I just knew I'd have to rebuild the back end of them to stitch in that cross member that comes across from one side to the other. So let's take a look at how I went about doing this. The first thing I did was to create a very basic temporary frame just to hold the two troop bays together in the right position. I did this for two reasons. One, I wanted to know what the two troop bays looked like alongside each other in their final position. I wanted to make sure I was happy with what I'd created so far before I started trying to tie them together. And then the other thing I wanted to do was confirm how far apart I wanted them, because if they're too far apart or too close together, it's just not going to look right. So in the end, I opted to go with the same center gap as the Halo 5 Spirit dropship has, the official one from Mega. I simply counted the studs and set this to the same gap, and straight away thought it looked fine. I did try it with a slightly wider gap, didn't look right, so reverted back to this. So that was the easy part, but next came the hardest part of this build so far, and it almost broke me. It gave me such a headache I had to take a break from it. I had to figure out how to create a permanent wall with enough strength to support both of these troop bays, as well as the cockpit hanging off the back of it and the detailing that was going to come off the front of it. It certainly wasn't easy, but this is how I ended up going about it. So as you can see, the first thing I did was to almost completely strip down one of the troop bays to allow me to stitch that cross wall into the back of the troop bay wall. This had to be done. It was the only way to do it. Once I was happy that I had everything in place and I had some strength there, I put the roof of the troop bay back on, as you can see it here. This kind of locked it all together and gave me the confidence that that was strong enough. And I've left the big gaps in the wall because at this point I wasn't 100% how I was going to attach all the exterior detailing off the back of the ship and the front of the ship. So for now I left them open. I also left them open because this thing is ridiculously heavy already, so I'm trying to limit myself with parts, but I tend to overbuild everything, so it just keeps getting heavier and heavier. So once I was happy that that was strong enough and it was likely to be able to support the full length of the troop bay, I then added the second troop bay and pretty much finalised the structural connection between this cross wall and the back of each of the troop bays. And then once I'd attached the roof to each troop bay, I could hold it with relative confidence that even when the rest of the troop bay parts are put back on and the weight's increased, it's still going to be a solid enough build to stand on its own. And with that finalised, I was able to move on to adding the exterior detailing to this wall. And just as a reminder, this is what I'm going for here in these images. I want to try and create these features. So I started by continuing the roof slope towards the centre as far as I knew it wanted to go to allow for that central column, which we'll add in later. This was the easy part. You can't beat just adding slopes. Once I'd added the slopes, I started trying to work on these pointy triangle bits that come out. There's 4 of them, 2 on the top, 2 on the bottom. I tried all sorts of different things here using parts, but in the end I found this combination of plate stacking gave me the most accurate curve that I was looking for, that allowed me to build it up in all directions. And as you can see, once you insert that into the back of one of the troop bay roofs, it does kind of give you that look that you can see in the image I showed you just a minute ago. So once I was happy with that, it was just a case of repeating it for the other side. And then once the other side's on, you get a much better idea of what you're dealing with. Next up, I wanted to create the section that fits in between these two sloped sections to make sure I had my gap right. I think the technical term for this part of the ship is the middle bit. So that's what I'm going to refer to it as going forwards, the middle bit. And at this point, I just wanted to create the rough shape. As you can see here, using these purple parts, it gives me a pretty good idea of that shape. At the moment, it's just a temporary build, just to give me something to build up against whilst I merge the sloped roof section into the wall of that middle bit. And to do this, the first thing I tried was using this sloped piece here. It seemed like it gave roughly the right shape, but as you can see, it just doesn't really flow very well into the slopes of the roof. It's got an overhang and it just looks a bit clumsy. I wanted to try and make something better, so I came up with this. I stripped back part of the roof section so I can incorporate all of this build, which is obviously far more complex, but it gives a far better end result. I even managed to get a light in there, and I stripped back some of the grey section just to add some of these tiny little wedge shaped 1x1 tiles, which I think makes all the difference on how the grey pointy bit merges into the purple slopey bit and into the wall for the middle bit. I think you know what I'm saying. Here you go. This is what version 1 looked like, really basic, and this is what version 2 looked like. No contest, so I'm going with version 2. All we have to do is create the same for the other side, and then this is what it looks like now that both of those roof sections are merged nicely into the wall of that middle bit. Okay, time to move on to the next bit. What I want to do next is create some detailing for the front of that centre wall, but I need to make sure that the cladding for the inside of the troop bay still fits in now that I've created that centre wall. So I'm going to start by adding back the cladding that I created in a previous part, so it's in and I know it fits before I then start attaching any cladding to the front of that centre wall. And as you can see, just by adding the cladding back to the troop bays, it instantly makes this build look more and more exciting as we go along. So every time I add a bit back on, it just inspires me to keep on building. So now that the troop bay claddings are back on, I just want to tidy up the ends of them where they meet that centre wall, because I never did that because I didn't know how far back I wanted them to come. I'm simply going to add a couple of 2x3 plates and then two wedges in between, two grey wedges in between that purple slope. Again, I didn't do this previously. I didn't know how this was going to work. And then also I added some underside slope pieces to the grey pointy bits that come out from the centre wall. As for the centre wall detailing, you can see I filled in some of those gaps with some bricks and side studs so I can attach some cladding to that centre wall. And for the centre wall, I had lots of parts left over from the Cybertruck that were quite interesting, so I came up with this design. I want it to look really industrial. In Lego it would be called greebling, and you don't see a huge amount of that on Mega, but I think for this section of the build it really lends itself well to make it just look really mechanical and industrial, really raw. The rest of the ship is so smooth, so having all of this real clunky detailing in now I really think stands out as a nice feature of the build. As I refit the roof section and the middle part of that central wall, you really start to see the benefits of the industrial look of all of the grey parts of this ship against the smooth purple parts of the hull. They really do complement each other nicely, and I'm really pleased I decided to go this route with this build. And to finish off this section of the build, it just needs that underside pointy bit, the grey bit, the talon, whatever it is, coming out from that central wall. This was relatively straightforward because I pretty much mirrored the design. It's slightly different underneath, but it's basically the same concept, so it was nice and easy to just create more of those and put them on the underside to get a real good take of what it looks like. Once this was done, all I wanted to do was to create the same parts for the other side, and then once those were on, I wanted to then finalize this middle bit. And I say finalize it as a basic shape. The internal detail, I'm afraid, is going to have to wait for a later date. I don't want to rush that part. I want to make sure I get it right, so that will come later. But once all that was on, I was very pleased with the end result. The underside isn't quite finished off because I don't think I'm going to mirror it to the top. I think it's going to be slightly different to the top where the roof or the underside of the hull meets that middle part. But all in all, I'm really pleased with how this phase of the build's gone. And there's only one thing left to do before I finalize this video, and that's put all of the rest of the troop bay parts back together so you can get a look at this thing up to date with everything built so far before we move on to part 5. And here it is, progress so far. So I'm really pleased with how the build's gone. I'm glad this part is done. It was a real headache. I'm hoping that the next part won't be as challenging, but I could just be being optimistic there. I'm also hoping that ideally the next part will be the final part. I'd really like to get the rest of the build finalized in one more part. After that, I still need to create a stand for it, so that may end up being its own part. And then after that, I'd like to do an overview video of it where I can just show you lots of nice shots and just talk about the build and the general experience in one go once it's all done. And I'm sorry to say that it could be another 2 or 3 weeks before you get the next part of this build, simply because it takes so long to gather up the parts from the sets that I'm using, i.e. the Havoc staff and the Cybertruck, not to mention how long it takes to actually just create the build. So I'm afraid you are going to have to wait, but I'm confident it will be worth it. So sit tight, and as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.